Hello, good evening. Thanks, lovely to see you again, Chris. Lovely to see you again, Connie. Thanks for coming over all the way from Singapore.
No, happy to
Again,
be
really
here.
good to see you. So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about, from your experiences on the jury and, looking at as a head of the jury committee, the role of creativity in campaigns. So that's the topic that I really want to explore with you. Specifically, it's about how do from your reading of all the entries, the topic is about balancing creativity and strategy in delivering marketing effectiveness. So the first question really is about how would you describe the role of creativity in driving campaign success? What role does creativity play in driving campaign success from your experiences looking at all of the entries? Who would like to go first? Is it Connie?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
I guess creativity, right? I mean, from looking at all of the different entries and I guess from past Effie and current Effies and all that, is really something that I think creates that point of distinction and differentiation. A lot of what we say that, I mean, it's creativity is also about strategy. I think creativity actually helps, create that distinctiveness and that point of difference. And I think that role is quite important, especially when we're looking at kind of effectiveness and what are the drivers of effectiveness.
Yeah, no, I would just echo the same thing Connie said. I think for me in judging the Effies, the thing I have to remind myself is it's not a creatives award. So, I kind of always start with the business success and the metrics that were resulting. But, creativity is the thing that really separates kind of the average, the bronze and silver from the golds and the things that really break through because, those are the magic that happens in advertising. Generally, the breakthroughs happen with creativity, I think. So.
Right. So from your prior experiences, have you seen any kind of changes in the kind of creativity between this year and some of the earlier award shows that you might have been part of?
I don't know whether there are changes and all of that, but I think what's really interesting is how it's been used, in a way that might maybe not about, I guess, I want to say the more conventional definition of creativity, right? It is about a different way of approaching something is possible. I think it's just about definition of creativity. It could be a different way of doing something. It could be something that's not done before in the category. I think that's important. So I think it's just an evolution that it's not so much of a stunt, an idea. It's something that actually makes a difference, in terms of the cultural connection, the engagement with the audience. So I think that's something that's kind of evolved and moved.
Right. Chris, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have that much historical context in judging the Effies. I judged last year and then this year, of course. And I think what I noticed maybe from last year to this year is some small differences would be in the application of AI in a lot of the cases and some creative use of that. So that was notable. And then I think the other thing that really stands out for me is, how people are doing kind of omni-channel and more integrated use of creativity. And that's something that I paid particular attention to, right? Because, I think offline kind of things that are engaged at a personal level, if they're well connected to online and in a creative way, that really amplifies and helps them go much further.
Right. Interesting. So talking about that, about creativity in the context of the overall entry and balancing creativity, the role that creativity plays and the role that strategic rigor and the strategy plays. What's your take in terms of the balance between the two? Do you think any one of them outweighs the other? What from your experience looking at the entries, some of the better entries, the best ones, did they have a certain kind of balance to it? Did they all, were there any common themes that you picked out from the really good ones, from the in terms of this balance between strategic rigor and creativity?
Oh, I don't know whether balance, is something, but it's a combination, of both. I know if we look at campaigns that maybe have over-prioritize creativity, if I may call it that way, right? Then, while it is, it might be stunning, it might be memorable, but when we look at what the Effie's is all about, it's that effectiveness, that strategic rigor. So is that there or is not there? Okay, so if you start with something that is stunningly like, wow, okay, but if all of that doesn't back up in terms of the business results and all of that, so I think that's not what the Effie stands for and what the Effie. But if you look at something that is really strategic in its rigor and all the dots were joined up and everything else, right? It's amazing, it delivers on the result. But does it make it that, that distinctiveness, that specialty that's not there when there isn't any kind of creativity? So I guess it's just, there's no over prioritizing either, but what's the best? I don't think it's the best combination, but, but I think both are important.
Right. Chris?
Yeah, no, I'm probably repeating much of what you said, but I think the Effies is really grounded in the approach to strategy and what the intended business result was to begin with. And then I think on top of that, creative is the thing that can kind of bring the results up or down on top of that, right? I think, equally, I mean, there were some awards or some case entries that were exceptionally creative, but they lacked kind of output in terms of the results, and those scored accordingly, right? They were not scored as high because it was clear that I think the business objectives were not clearly mapped out to begin with.
Right.
And it's also about the criteria, I think, where I mean, the Effie is one of those with the most rigorous, I think, judging. And I think that's key. If you look at the different criteria, it's not just about the objectives or the strategy, but it's also how it comes to life. So I think that's when it's that combination of strategic intent plus creativity, or depending which one comes first. Okay, I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's just how it all comes together. I think it's really important.
Interesting. So without naming anything from the past, can you recall any instances when a creative execution or creativity elevated the campaign and made it much more effective?
From this year's cases?
From any time in the past as well? Without naming any?
Oh, I think we just have to wait for the awards.
Okay, no, not without naming today's this one.
Yeah.
Years in the past, you mentioned that you judged last year.
Yeah, let me think about last year's cases. Do
you recall any?
Oh.
Might be a bit difficult to kind of recall that. Let's come back to that a little bit.
Okay.
So I think you mentioned a very interesting point, Connie, about connecting the dots.
Yeah.
So there's no sort of ideal balance. There's no sort of a fixed balance. It needs to flow from one to the other. So what do you think are the pieces that connect the dots? How do you ensure that creative ideas are aligned with business objectives, brand strategy, and they all work together? Are there any kind of checkpoints? Are there anything from a jury, from a judging perspective, do you look for anything that connects the dots?
Let me.
Well, I could jump in and say, on that one, I think there's got to be a consistent logic between, because we're able to see the way that they've written up the brief and the intended business results through to the actual results, and then we see the creative, hopefully at the end, right, as a justification of that. And what I'm looking for in that is a consistent logic, right, and that because sometimes we see cases that are fairly loosely defined in terms of what the business result was expected to be. Sometimes creative. There was a breakthrough with creative, but it actually wasn't linked to the intended business result. And so, I think what I'm saying is that, if there's a consistent logic and flow from, the case and the brief through to creative and then the actual results, then I think that satisfies our interest, right, in seeing something that really hits the mark, right? Sometimes you see something that's wildly creative. There were certainly a couple this year that were exceptionally creative.
Oh, great.
But they didn't quite, they hadn't outlined the creative results from the beginning, right? And so there's a bit of a disconnect.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess, just to add on, right, to what you're saying, and it's almost like I think there's something about it because we've gone through reading all the entries, judging different FEs, right? That there's something about storytelling when it comes to award writing and submission, right? So for all of us, right, a lot of it, the process we read through the award.
Yeah.
Okay, if you can read through it and kind of you don't stop anywhere and go, wait, where did that happen? Where did that point come from? I didn't remember somewhere because it's a flow, right? Like what you're saying, it's a flow. So I think that's really important. Is that as you go through it, that consistency, that connectivity, you're going through it. Every one point connects to the next, to the next. You're not coming to any point where you go, wait a minute, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Was there an insight that led? Because if you keep going back and forth to try and figure it out, then I don't think that's maybe not the best way to present, because all the work was incredible, but there's a way of making sure that that we read it, that we understand where the logic and the flow is. So I think that's important.
I think that's a fascinating point, because some of the other judges made pretty much the same point about you need to have a certain level of storytelling in the writing of the entry. So it's one thing to be able to actually develop the campaigns, develop the work, show results in the marketplace, change people's behaviors, etc.
Exactly.
It's quite another thing to turn that into a compelling story, because the audience is different. The audience is not the consumer out there. The audience is esteemed, experienced judges who've been there before themselves. Indeed.
And I think there's so many times when, like, if it had only been written differently, might have gained a different edge or different advantage. So I think that's why I think for a lot of it, the comments that we give, I think it's important. Because I think it's about continuing building on that I guess that ability, that credibility, the expertise in some of the storytelling of all of these great work.
Indeed. I think that's building a little bit on the topic about storytelling. At the end of the day, a lot of this is about how you set up the problem, how you diagnose it, how do you develop the strategy, how do you articulate where the strategy comes from, and from that strategy, what do you want your creative to do for you? At the end of the day, this is a commercial venture. It's not just art for art's sake. So what do you think are are there any risks where if you over prioritize a strategy or creative, do you see risks? Have you seen any entries where they perhaps have prioritized the one over the other? Does it sort of, what are the risks of that? Is there some kind of a balance that is out of place? How do you sort of evaluate that?
Well, I can offer up one insight, and that is I think we're currently living in a world of marketing that has somewhat prioritized performance over creative and kind of top of funnel brand. And so some of the entries are extremely kind of pedantic and focused on micro results, right, in terms of driving conversions. But if they don't have a certain level of creative that's memorable, they fall a little bit short as well, I think. So that would be one thing that I think from my experience, case entries need to be careful of, right? Is that, creative it needs to be there to kind of have the breakthrough that we're looking for as well, right? Yeah.
I think just to add on to that, right, in some of the discussions that we have, a lot of it might be, for some entries, not just, current and past, right, that might have a lot of emphasis on results, on different results. But some of it, we've been calling it vanity metrics. Okay, it sounds really good, but does it really add to that kind of business outcomes, the results that we're looking for? It could be huge amount of numbers and metrics, but we're like, doesn't really quite do that. And I think that's when we need to really be, like what you were saying, be careful, right, about what we put in, and make sure that it's meaningful, that it actually drives to, it really is about the business outcomes at the end of the day.
Indeed. So my last final question really is about you mentioned a bit about, short term, there's a lot of promos, and if you look at it from that point of view, it starts to look a bit cliched, a bit generic, etc. So what would be your top tips for, based on what you've seen as the really good entries versus some of the not, ones that have probably struggled a little bit? What would be your top 2 tips for people in the business, in the agency business, who are actually creating the work, and maybe a top tip for potential clients who want to win entries?
Yeah, I mean, I think for agencies submitting cases, I think having a super simple, clear, concise business objective outlined, and then showing a direct line to how their piece of work addressed that, because some of them kind of meander and get a little bit off target. But again, I think we talked a lot about the impact of creativity, but having briefs and problems clearly defined at the outset, I think is the driver of what really creates impact.
Indeed,
right,
indeed. Setting it up in the right way, so it leads.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very, very good point about that. Connie, what do you think? What would be your top tips to agencies and clients?
So I think that I guess just the way that it's a lot of what we discuss it's about when we look at the entries, right? Is it the product or is it the marketing effort? Okay, so I think in this case, a lot of what we want to look at is the marketing efforts behind it and not a product or promotion that's driven certain results. So if you think about that, then how do you then make sure that, I guess the tip being that, be very clear, right, that it's not a product or promotion that's driving a lot of these results. It's the marketing efforts behind the product or behind the promotion, right, that has resulted in all of this, creativity, the results. So I think that's important. If not, we spend a lot of time saying, okay, so is it just, does it matter, what the campaign was? This product could have no marketing behind it and they still drive all these results. Indeed. So I think that's something we need to be careful about, that when we look at that,
Yeah.
Excellent.
I mean, just the last point I didn't really address for brands themselves, but I think bravery counts, right, in the business, right? I think the ones that stand out for me as the top cases, both this year and last year, were ones that took a little bit of risk, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I think you made some really good points. I think I really liked the bit what you talked about when you say you have to be able to connect the dots. And if you're writing an entry, and if you read the entry and you have to keep going back and forth and start to say, hey, where did this come from? Where did this come from? Basically, it's a bit disjointed. It's either not set up well, it's not flowing through, and it fundamentally isn't a story well told. It's a story that's a little bit that needs somebody to sort of really work hard to figure out what the story is about, really.
It's almost like make it easy, right?
Make it easy,
for the
make it easy,
to
make it compelling. Okay. It's literally like the book that you can't put down. You go from chapter to chapter to chapter.
Exactly.
And that's the way people need to look at an award entry. It's a different skill set to actually creating the work.
No, exactly. So, exactly. You kind of go, wow, I want to know what happened next.
Exactly. You want to know what happens next. Absolutely. Well, Chris, Connie, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks so much again for making your time. And thank you, Connie, for coming over, and Chris for coming over all the way from Vancouver, I think. Yeah. Indeed. Pleasure to have you both. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.